I welcome everyone back now to the second panel. We have a diverse and shifting panel here for the latter part of the morning. Some people have been added, some people are moving to other panels. So we have the introduction of people involved in political, with our ex-former governor of Wisconsin to my immediate right, and we have research being done by representatives from Africa, and I think some of the other speakers here may be moving to another panel this afternoon. So I would just like to begin by giving some broad introductory remarks to situate the diverse nature of our discussion and following through on some of the comments that were made by General Ham this morning. Because I think the underlying issue that he made, we have another member of our panel here, very good. The underlying points that the General made, I think, have to be thought through, which is the connection between the causes of our problems of insecurity and instability, and how that is linked to the problems we have in Africa. And I would say from my outlook over many years, almost a quarter of a century of looking at Africa, there are no conflicts in the Horn of Africa that I know of that are not directly related to the issues of land, water, and food. And I think if we're going to deal with the questions of stability and security, we have to address those issues. To deal with the Horn of Africa now, in this period, I think means we have to go beyond what an Ethiopian friend of mine said, managing poverty to eradicating poverty. I think poverty is the killer in Africa, and it's the disease that if we don't eliminate will consume the body. Droughts do not cause famines. The lack of development causes famine. The lack of economic development causes famine. The lack of food development causes famines. And I think we should not accept the fact that we will have, because we have a drought, that we will have a famine. And we should not have had a second famine 20 years after, a generation after the famine of the early 1990s. We don't want to actually become experts in emergency food relief. We want to become experts in growing food. And that's much, I think, that we have to address. We need to build infrastructure platforms throughout Africa that integrate water and energy and power so that we can actually build healthy economies and we can grow food. And I think growing food is the #1 issue for us now. Is we have to bring the power and water and rail transportation to produce food to feed the people, because food is causing, in my opinion, is the biggest cause of conflicts. It's people fighting over just enough to find an existence. And I think we need to think big in terms of infrastructure projects that transform the nature of what we're looking at. We get out of the box, so to speak. I think one was brought up this morning by in the early Q&A on this TransAqua project, which would take approximately 5% of the water of the Congo Basin, send it north across the Central African Republic to refurbish Lake Chad. This would have a massive effect in the region. Another great project would be the East-West Railroad from either Djibouti or Port Sudan going all the way across to Dakar, Senegal. This would revolutionize and change all the economies from East to West Africa across the girth of the continent. I think if we look at the IGAD countries, which David Shin this morning characterized as the Horn, you have 213 million people. What are we going to do to provide for those people and future generations, their children and their grandchildren? And most of these countries in the IGAD are growing at about 2.5% plus growth rate, and some are higher and one is lower. How much food are we going to be able to provide to maintain 2,200 calories a day for people, to maintain protein? How much water are we going to provide for 15 liters a day per water per person per year? These are the questions we have to ask, and I think it's our obligation to figure out how to answer them. And I think that we have to have a vision of the future. What do we want to see in the Horn of Africa in the future? We want to see a much different place. We want to see a different future where we have eliminated the causes of hunger and poverty, where we can provide for hundreds of millions of people and their progeny in the decades and generations ahead. This requires a total increase in growth of all basic physical parameters of the economy. And that seems to me is how you deal with the underlying causes of insecurity and instability. And I would just end my introductory comments by pointing to something that probably is not something everyone thinks about. But approximately 45 years ago this month, Pope Paul VI, in March 1967, had a famous encyclical called Popularium Progressio. And he said in that, peace, the new name for peace is development. And I think that's something we all should think about. How do we get peace and stability? So those are some of the broad questions that I wanted to initiate in this discussion. And as I say, I think we'll try to find a way on the panel to bring this together and with the various experts here, maybe deal with some of these problems.
Thank you very much. Since this is the session on how environment affected or create the food crisis that we experienced in 2011 in the Horn of Africa, I thought maybe it will be helpful to share some information, some data on how from rainfall deficit we experienced the loss of lives in the Horn of Africa. I don't know if I can move it through. All right. From all the reports that we have, the drought really started in April 2011, and it's reported that the whole region had the deficit of 100 to 200 millimeters of water, and mainly because of the counter-performance in between June and September last year, because as you will notice, 50 to 100% of annual rainfall happened during that period, June to September. And the map, what the map is showing is the actual rainfall performance last year. And you can see that almost all Somalia received only 10% of the rain expected rainfall during that period, and as a result, so that's Somalia and in northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia, and of course Djibouti. So that's really the what I call the event that pulled the trigger to food crisis because of that we had a disruption of the whole agricultural production system. Maize sowing, for example, was delayed by 10 to 30 days throughout the region, and overall cropping also was delayed by an average of 30 to 45 days, and as a result, farmers become a little bit selective on where to plant. So it didn't matter much how much land access they have, but where to plant and to expect to grow something. And they ended up with diminishing opportunity to cultivate cash crops. They experienced failed crops, and not only the crop production was disrupted, but also the livestock with depletion of grazing resources and significant livestock mortality. So on one hand, you have this deficit in rainfall, and on the other, as a result, failed crop production, and of course, significant mortality in livestock. In addition to In addition to that, you have at the same time a surge in food price in the region. In June 2011, for example, maize and red sorghum prices increased by more than 100% on annual basis. That's in Somalia, particularly in Mogadishu. And in Ethiopia, the wheat wholesale prices in Addis Ababa market increased by 85%. Compared to 2010. The same thing happened in Nairobi for maize price that increased by 55%. So now you have the ingredient really for a disaster. So on the one hand, you have very insignificant local production, and you have high food prices. So the household access to food is now widened, and as a result, that's what should not happen. We have this million of people in part of Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, and Djibouti at risk. Risk of losing life, and it's reported that 11 million people throughout the region was in need of some sort of life-saving assistance, and child malnutrition rate in some areas approaching 30%. And the map that I presented, that's from FuseNet, shows you using the so-called IPC classification, the Integrated Food Security Phase classification, and you can see that around Mogadishu, that's level 5, which means famine, and throughout the region, it's more between crisis to emergency. So what I'm trying to say is you start with a deficit in rainfall that disrupt the whole livelihood system, both crops and livestock. You add increase in food prices, you end up with the crisis that we experienced, that the region experienced last year. How do we move forward? Just quickly, the first is we need to improve how to respond to the food and nutrition insecurity, especially for vulnerable people at risk in the short term. So that's, and some pointing to a failure of the whole international community on how to respond to the crisis. The second, we need to promote early recovery strategies in the midterm. How do you move from mere emergency assistance to a more long-term, medium-term strategies? And of course, for the long term, there is a need to promote livelihood resilience. Some people are pointing out to irrigation schemes, to drought-resistant seed, high-quality fertilizer. Some of my colleagues, for example, are working on the return to small-scale irrigation in the regions. There are areas in that region where you can develop easily small-scale irrigation that may help to mitigate or prevent the crisis. Thank you.
Our second speaker will be Dr. Niku Mordi, President and founder of the African Transformation Embassy, who also has firsthand experience from East Africa. So,
thank you so much for all the organizers of this great conference. I'm very honored because food security concerning the Horn of Africa means people concerns, which means saving lives. So this is something that is to my heart. When it seems there is no end to misery, pain, unrest, and the ultimate death of millions, especially women and children, causes me to form another non-profit organization that is called Africa Transformation Embassy. It's a collaborative hub through various strategic capacity building for infrastructure in order to eliminate poverty, ignorance, disease, and bring peace to the communities. With over 45 countries' hand-on experience, ATE has practical solutions that have transformed lives through sincere passion to bring solutions to humanity through compassion, sacrifices, action, wisdom, and understanding. It is shocking and mind-boggling to know that many people are still dying in the Horn of Africa and other parts of Africa. These problems in that part of Africa are not new. They have been researched by great professionals, discussed by many great powers, and for years resources have been poured into solving these problems, especially food, power, and energy crisis in the Horn of Africa. Yet recent reports say 13 million people might or are dying because of starvation. Maybe the figures are exaggerated, like someone says, but those are the report that tells us over and over that people are dying. I'm sorry to confess, this makes me sad or wonder, how long will the people continue to suffer and live without basic human needs? This is a century of advanced technology. One will expect policymakers, professional researchers, and all those who have been involved in solving the crisis in the Horn of Africa to be discussing success stories, how million lives have been spared because of their efforts, or would be sharing the strategies that are already in place to prevent humanitarian crises. Instead, we are, or they are, in different parts of the world discussing how millions might starve to death before the summer. This is mind-boggling. Drought is inevitable because it is a natural phenomenon that no human being can prevent. And this phenomena affects different parts of the world. Yet many countries have solved these problems. Countries with strong economies and good political stabilities and structures have successfully eliminated the drought. However, when there is no stability in the political structure and the government engaged in army conflicts, social and development programs have been, the basic human needs are neglected, and the environmental degradation is also inevitable. Unless we understand, like we have heard several people say this morning, that it is impossible to solve any problem to solve without meeting the basic human needs. All humans are equal around the world. And if those needs are not met, the basic human needs, it will be difficult to solve any problem, and also to understand the political and the community structure. These are explicably linked, with each acting as a catalyst of the other. Although drought can be managed, but recurring droughts in areas of conflict often create ecological and environmental catastrophes, as in the Horn of Africa. Nonetheless, I'm a believer that solutions are possible. Let me share some practical steps that can address these concerns. Meet the basic human needs is key, and also the approach when you are trying to solve those problems. Number 2, build strong human ethics educational system to bring mutual respect and understanding. Number 3, invest in sustainable development. I think we have heard them saying over and over. I appreciate that. Number 4, consider new strategies. We were talking about since 1970, things have been written. I wonder if we go back to find out the research that has been done before in order to build on what has been done, or we keep on inventing the wheel. Create better working environment of trust and partnership between stakeholders. Link the civil society organization with local government officials up to the national government to help solve problems. Strengthen neighborhood cooperation among villagers to prevent conflict. Number 8, invest in technology. Right now, there are so many technology. I'm not a technology person, I'm a practical person, but I hear there is hydro-breed agriculture, hydroelectricity, turbines for waterfall to make energy, waste to make energy, vertical wind turbines, and agriculture with the hydroponic technology. All this can alleviate poverty, can alleviate drought, can help to alleviate misery, and utmost bring peace. As I conclude, I am aware of the great efforts that many great people are putting in helping Africa. Even this conference, it is because we are trying, or you are trying, to help. Thank you very much. Nevertheless, those who have been dealing with the Horn of Africa have to honestly ask hard questions in order to get different results and reduce or eradicate many crises, especially the U.S. Africa Command. We thank you for your effort, but start by asking such question as, why the amount of resources involved in solving the crisis in the Horn of Africa for years have produced very little results? Another question, are all those involved, especially in the Horn of Africa, are they sincerely interested in finding solutions to solve the problems, or they are there just because they are there, or are they really sincere want to solve the crisis? Indeed, I am aware there are some problems that cannot be solved no matter how much technology or manpower or resources we pour into solving this problem. There are times we need the Creator's intervention on what to do. There are things no human intelligence can solve. Africa Transformation Embassy is trying and has rich experience, volunteers, and partners who have taken practical action to transform lives and meet basic human needs in several African countries. The people in the Horn of Africa are no exception. There will be an end to the crisis, and I believe with your conference this morning or today, solution will be found so that lives can be changed, lives can be saved. Children are dying, there's people's children, They are fathers, they are somebody's uncle, somebody's aunt. So with me, this conference means so much because we are dealing with people, and people are the same everywhere, and there will be solution. Thank you so much.
Next will be Patricia McCardle. Solar Cookers International. You have your slides? Okay.
Thank you very much. General Hom and some of the other panelists this morning have talked about how drought, conflict, and population displacement are affecting food security. I'm going to talk about something that's rarely discussed in these fora, and that is fuel. The fuel needed to cook that food, because much of the food that's given in refugee situations and much of the food we eat every day has to be cooked. I want you to look in the next few slides at something that most people never look at, and that's the shadows. See the shadows? Whoops. There we go. In the Horn of Africa and in much of the Sahel, the population for many, many years, for hundreds of years, was small, settled, sustainable communities. They could survive droughts. They could survive conflicts because there were not very many of them, and they lived very sustainably in small populations. Today, that's not happening anymore because we have places like Dadaab Refugee Camp, where there are almost 500,000 people seeking shelter from all the conflict, the drought, and the famine that is affecting that area. Until recently, families in these refugee camps were provided with food, water, shelter, medicine, but for the most part, the women were expected to get their own fuel. Most of the fuel, as I mentioned, is still gathered by women, and I want you to look at the shadows again. In some cases, I was in Chad at Darfur refugee camp several years ago, and UN officials there told me that they are beginning to ship in wood in some cases because there really is no more fuel. The women can't go, there is no fuel. So they're shipping it in, and it's costing them millions of dollars to provide the wood so people can cook the food that they're being given and heat the water. Most of the people, as I said, who have to gather this fuel are women and young girls. It becomes a security issue first when UN or Africa Corps forces have to go out and escort these women to protect them. And it's good that they're protecting these women. The problem is that they're protecting these women while they go into the communities that are settled, who live there, and chop down their trees. So these women are being attacked in many cases, but in a lot of cases it's not because they're rapists roaming around the desert. It's because they're taking the fuel, the wood that these other communities need to survive, and when they go in and take it out around the water area where there's water, those water areas dry up. The oases dry up. I like this photo because this woman, you can see behind her back is an axe. And she's heading out. She is very happy because she's found this tree. It's the last one. She's going to chop that tree down and drag it home and hope that no one else tries to steal that wood from her because she has to cook dinner for her family. And notice again the shadows. "90% of Africa still cooks with wood, and they're chopping down that wood much faster than can be sustained, as you can see from the statistics I have on the screen. It's going fast in some parts of Africa that are very forested. There's another problem, and that's charcoal. The greatest cause of deforestation in Africa now is charcoal, and charcoal is much easier to transport, but it takes 10 kilos of wood to make 1 kilo of charcoal. And again, those trees are going to take a long time to grow back. Many of you may have seen several years ago an article in National Geographic about the Virunga gorillas being killed. If you read that article, you would see that the reason they were killed was because the charcoal makers who were going into national parks were angry that they were being chased out of those parks, so they killed the gorillas. So, what is the solution? Burning less wood and using fuel-efficient stoves is part of the solution, and a very important part. The Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves and the Shell Foundation. The Shell Foundation has spent millions of dollars developing fuel-efficient stoves and helping to market those stoves in India and Africa. And being able to burn fuel much more efficiently is very important. The Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, which Secretary Clinton announced about a year and a half ago, is also will be spending many more millions of dollars to do this, to develop clean, fuel-efficient stoves. However, there is another source of energy that people don't think about very often, and it rises every morning over the Horn of Africa and much of Africa and all the rest of the world. It provides a fuel that is so far untapped in great abundance. This is a NASA solar insolation map. It shows the amount of sunshine annually that hits our planet. And as you can see, there is a great deal of sun in the Horn of Africa, in much of Africa, and in much of the developing world. Today, meaning today, really today, our planet is being buffeted by a huge solar storm. So I know that the military is very engaged with the sun today because it's screwing up their communications all around the world. However, I would like to see our military and our aid organizations a little more involved with the sun as a source of energy for cooking for the poor people in the developing world. And today, I'm talking about the Horn of Africa. One more point I want to make about the sun is that every 40 minutes, enough solar energy hits our planet to fuel all human activity for a year. That's a lot of sunshine, and we are barely tapping into that energy. I'm going to talk about solar cookers because that's what I do. Since I retired from the State Department and since I discovered the power of solar cookers during my year in Afghanistan, I promote this technology as a volunteer everywhere I can. This photograph shows a fishing village in Somalia. It was wiped out by the tsunami. And these fishermen had nothing to cook with except for dung, and they didn't even have very much of that. A small organization led by a Somali woman knew about parabolic solar cookers, brought them in and distributed them, and it allows these villagers to cook food, to boil, to cook their fish with no fuel at all. And the only time they need fuel is at night or on cloudy days, and then they can use their limited amount of dung or whatever else they have. But as you can see, there's not much else there. There are several kinds of solar cookers. The parabolics are made mostly in China. There are about 1 million in use in China. It's a sort of an unregulated commercial market. The parabolics that are being distributed in Africa are mostly made there right now. But a lot more research is needed to make them cheaper, safer, and lighter, and they should also be manufactured in Africa because these are not high technology devices. One parabolic solar cooker can boil a pot of water in about 20 minutes. And last October at the Tides exhibit out here on the field at National Defense University, when my colleagues were trying to heat water so we could have coffee in the morning, one coffee pot blew out the system because we were running on we were running on photovoltaic cells. It takes a 10 by 10 foot photovoltaic cell to heat one hot plate. However, the same amount of energy can be generated by one of these solar cookers. I attended in January a solar cooking workshop in India. The Indian government is subsidizing the distribution of solar cookers, small family-sized and large institutional-sized solar cookers like this one, In many parts of India, mainly in northern India, in Ladakh, in the mountainous areas where it's very cold, but these solar cookers work when it's 0 degrees out. It doesn't need to be hot. All they need is sunshine. These parabolic solar cookers can be shipped in a box and set up anywhere. They could provide food in refugee camps, and I know that in Dadaab right now, a number of large-scale, how much time do we have? Okay, I'll finish in 1 minute. Large-scale parabolic solar cookers like this one can cook for a lot of people all day in the sunshine. The small panel cookers like this one, tens of thousands of these are being used in Darfur refugee camps, made by the women. These can cook a pot of food in 1 hour. Box cookers can reach 350 degrees. They can cook several pots of food at the same time, and they can create jobs for young men. Men drink tea in refugee camps, and that takes water. And this is a Somali refugee, or a Sudanese refugee making his tea. There are myths about solar cooking, and one of them is that women have to watch their solar cookers all the time, which they don't. They can set them out and leave them alone, that they take too long to cook. Solar parabolic cookers cook as fast as fire. And the smoky flavor that's missing is something that the Global Alliance is trying to get out of all solar cookers, out of all cooking devices. As I said before, the food that these people eat has to be cooked somehow. And if they have to buy their fuel, that takes away from the amount of food that they'll be able to eat because they have to pay for the fuel. This is a refugee camp in Chad, and again, I want you to see that there is a solution to fuel needed to cook the food, and I hope that you will consider this. I'd be happy to provide you with more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a final speaker. His biography was not supplied to you, but I'm sure you can get it from the NDU. This is Governor Scott McCollum. He was the governor of Wisconsin from 2001 to 2003, and he's had some experiences in information technology that he's going to share with us.
If I could ask, how many have heard of aid matrix technology? Just to get a quick, good, thank you. I'll give a quick nutshell. Aid matrix technology is supply chain information systems that is utilized by over 40,000 organizations in six countries. Or a nonprofit organization. As an example, almost all charitable food in the U.S. goes through aid matrix technology. Almost all charitable food in the U.S. goes through the system. Our technology is connected into the supply chain systems. Kraft, Kellogg, Conagra, Coca-Cola, major food companies. They're able to go on their website, offer what it is they're going to donate. As soon as they press donate, over 200 food companies in real time see what is being offered and bid for that. We do that with Feeding America. Most charitable food in the UK. We do food systems throughout the world. You can imagine a number of areas very challenging. I'll just give a quick example in food banking in Zimbabwe. When we're called in to set up the systems in warehousing, you have to set it up. And this is why some of the higher end technology companies have difficulties. People haven't seen a computer. You've got electricity 2 hours a day when you got to sync things up. We provided a computer as a nonprofit, trained the people. We noticed a couple of weeks after we left, nothing was moving through the system. Hadn't explained that you couldn't drop the computer. So it's just some of the challenges in the field that you're dealing with. As I mentioned, we do food in many areas, do disaster systems as well. We take technologies that must be used every day for businesses, particularly large businesses, to be competitive in the marketplace. Yet those same principles, and I notice your point 8 of applying technologies, those same principles have not been applied appropriately to the humanitarian sector. Those principles can be used to help dramatically. In fact, just in the food area, to put in perspective, and I'll quote some from an economist, in the 60s and 70s, ending hunger and malnutrition seemed relatively simple. You grew more crops. So it seemed fairly simple from that perspective. If the harvest failed, the rich countries, the plentiful countries, sent in the food aid. And it was actually in Ethiopia the famine of 1984 that undermined this approach. It was biblical proportions of major issue in a country where food was available. As Amartya Sen, who's an economist, Indian economist, put it, and has long said, what it taught is what really matters with food is not the oversupply, but individual access. And I say it in perspective as well. We do the disaster system in India. The Indian government just asked us to look at food banking, which we do in a number of countries. 1/3 of the food grown in India never gets to market. It's a huge problem in logistics. In fact, it's a larger problem because of the vermin and the rodents and things they've got. 1/3 of the food never gets to market. So it's a logistics issue that in many respects can be applied, some of the logistics solutions can be applied to getting food to the end user. As an example, in Africa, we're now doing the technology for organizations, actually we're doing them globally, but the pilot countries for Save the Children, we're doing systems, Catholic Relief Services, are two organizations involved in the Horn of Africa. Third, we may end up doing Action Contre des Femmes, food charitable organization, and the IGO out of France. We're going to do all of the technology for those organizations from procurement, so no longer, and with apologies to some of the U.S. agencies which are responsible for sending subsidized American food to other countries, political comment, thus dislocating the emerging economies of those countries. Procurement can be made in those countries. And in effect, one of the disadvantages in developing areas, and for those with lower income, for a marketplace to work, you need information. You need information flow for a marketplace to work. If you can't give that information, it won't work. If you have a system and you can use technology, because most country and people now have access to mobiles, which allows you access to the internet, you can have a system that allows that marketplace to work. So with Save the Children and Catholic Relief Services, you not only build the procurement system in the countries, you build transportation systems, because there's the ability to see the transportation needs on this. You track warehousing. You have the ability then to drive a collaboration, not only getting things to market in a timely fashion, setting up a logistics program. You're beginning to drive a collaboration, since it's a similar data system. Save the Children, Catholic Relief, other organizations on the system can share what is in warehousing. They can share procurement and purchasing. So you're driving that collaboration within the community. So that, in a nutshell, is Aid Matrix. Do different types of things, as I say, from procurement, transportation, warehousing, do Care International warehousing, so they can now, with the warehouses in Bangladesh, can sit in Atlanta and go online and see real-time what are in the warehouses. I'm going to just add one other point, because it ties in with supply chain, but it's also a movement that's begun by the UN and other organizations. In the governments of the world are paying increasing attention to nutrition. It's not just the amount of food, but it's the nutritional value, and in many cases added nutritional value that goes in to this. So that there's a how-to policy guide called SUN, which stands for Scale Up Nutrition, which was put together in 2010 by donors and charities. The World Bank is working. It's got a book called Repositioning Nutrition is Central to Development. The UN has spun off a group called GAIN, which is headquartered in Geneva, which is nutritional values. So it's even a less amount of food, but getting the nutrition and the right kind of food to people throughout the world.